Lucy is an architectural historian. She studied at Reading and then did her MA and PhD at the Coulthard Institute of Art. She's worked as an architectural investigator and researcher for English Heritage and now Historic England for nearly 20 years. She's the co-author of books on the buildings of Austin Moor, which is a fantastic book if you've ever, it's a lovely book on the history of Austin Moor if you get a chance to see it. And also a book on Margate, Kent, and she's worked on projects looking at buildings and towns across the northeast, recently particularly in Middlesbrough, Sunderland, and of course Shildon, which she'll be talking about today. Marcus Jecock is an archaeologist who graduated in archaeology from Southampton University more years ago than he cares to remember, apparently. He's worked for Historic England and its predecessor organisations for the past 40 years, for most of that time as an archaeological investigator, surveying, recording and reporting on upstanding archaeological landscapes and monuments of all types and periods from the Neolithic to the modern day, including industrial landscapes, as again we're going to hear. He's not a period specialist, but considers himself a landscape archaeologist and expert generalist. He currently leads on coastal archaeology at Historic England, but recently that hasn't stopped him recording and reporting on sites of different and periods far apart in time, as Thornborough Henges and Shildon Coal Drops. So that's quite a diverse area of research. So I welcome you both and thank you.
Thank you so much for coming tonight to Marcus and I's talk. We are going to explore a couple of different aspects of New Shildon. If I fall into the shorthand of just calling it Shildon, would you excuse me? Because it is all a little bit entangled, as I will explain. So, in 2008 to 23, in the run-up to this year's bicentenary for the Stockton and Darlington Railway, Historic England ran a Heritage Action Zone with a number of partners, which included the S&DR's very prolific Friends Group, the National Railway Museum, of course, at Shildon, and all the local authorities on whose land the S&DR passed. What this really meant in practice was that we, as an organisation, gave a huge amount of advice, grants and support for the restoration and interpretation of lots of structures and indeed bits of the S&DR's main line. HE also revised and established some new listings, as I believe Eric, my colleague, presented to you back in June. Underpinning all of this work was as much research as those of us in-house could possibly provide. And from my point of view, this included the exploration of the history and the buildings still surviving from the S&DR in New Shildon. So I co-authored that one. And Marcus, of course, wrote his report on the history of the coaling station, which he will be telling you all about in a bit. So I'm going to start off because it gives the context, and then you can do a bit of in-depth exploration of locomotion coaling with Marcus. So New Shildon is, strictly speaking, as a name, first seen in 1825, in that opening year of the S&DR. And it refers to a very small huddle of buildings, perhaps in two different groups, which sprung up around the S&DR's new tracks. Of course, there is an old village of Shildon, which you can see just here. And it is in an august position. It's very close to Watling Street, Bishop Auckland to the north. And it was never, as you can see here, very much more than a one-road village. But New Shildon is going to be put a little bit to the south here. So when I say New Shildon, I definitely mean New Shildon. If I say Shildon, it may be either Old Shildon or the new combined name of the settlement, because of course the two have joined up, and today, officially, it is Shildon. So hopefully you will stay with me, and hopefully I'll get them the right ones in the right place. So here we are, Old Shildon, as the first edition Ordnance Survey map so helpfully tells us. which by the middle of the 19th century, as you can see, has a whole new settlement going on to the south of it. We decided for our contribution to the Heritage Action Zone that a greater understanding of New Shildon was probably required. Lots of claims are made for it, first railway town being one of them. But I think the most important thing about it is that it grows with the SNDR. It starts with the SNDR and it grows with the SNDR. We know that there is Old Shildon to the north as a self-supporting settlement of its own right. But we felt that with Locomotion's new building being created down at the museum in Shildon, and with all the focus on the line, that why don't we see what is left of this settlement, which was very much key to the way the area has developed. So in the course of 2021, just sort of post-COVID lockdowns, on a very rainy week or two, a colleague and I marched through New Shildon, street by street, building by building, taking a host of grey, wet and very soggy photographs, and periodically bolting into Locomotion for cover, because it was the only place that could actually look after us like that. And we combined our assessment of all those standing structures with historic map evidence, a lot of which we'll look at today, and archival research, principally in the National Archives, but also National Railway Museum in Darlington as well. Wherever we needed to go, we went. And we produced a document called a Historic Area Assessment, which is basically, you take a place, you divide it into thematic areas where they have a commonality of both historic past and the present of their structures. So I think we had 7 different character areas in New Shildon. And we'll give you the links to all of that at the end if you want to see what we made of it in our report form. One really clear theme emerged from the work, though, was that despite the fact that New Shildon is initiated by the SNDR, that there was another strand that was really important to the town's history, and that was the coal industry and how it interacted with it. And so it was rather nice that today we could bring that strand out a little bit in this talk. So I skipped a couple. So that's where I want to go. So before the railway, what was Shildon? Well, it's a one-road town, just about 2 miles southeast of Bishop Auckland, about 8.5 miles out of Darlington. We think that in the late 18th century, it is a hamlet of about 100 people. They're probably employed agriculturally and locally on the nearby farmsteads, maybe in a little bit of quarrying, which was the other thing that's always gone on in and around that part of County Durham. The geology of magnesium limestone and the Pennine lower and middle coal measures makes the area highly lucrative and suitable for coal extraction. And of course, during the 18th century, that was starting to be explored quite considerably, and by the 19th century, it was already galloping. But coal, of course, is heavy and difficult to move. And the only way to move it out of this part of the South Durham coalfield is on a cart. The rivers Wear and Tees are not navigable close enough by. So in order to sell your coal, once you've won it, it was always going to be a really hard endeavour. And so it's not surprising that we get various plans through the late 18th and early 19th centuries to deal with the transport issue. There is a debate in 1768, another one again in the 1810s about putting in a canal, because after all, that was our sort of bog standard national way of moving large goods at this time. And maybe that would connect down to the river ports better. But the decision, as we know, historically is made in 1818 that there is going to be a railway, not a canal. Debate happens then over the chosen route. And in the end, we have what becomes the S&DR, a public railway powered by locomotives, stationary engines, and horses. A combination of things for a combination of people and a combination of goods. The chosen route of the railway was coming from up here. So the mines around here in St Helens, Auckland, that were going to be linked by a railway coming around this way, sort of south and west of Shildon village, and then coming across here as you head then down towards Darlington. This terrain here was marshy. It doesn't appear to have been particularly high quality agricultural land. I think it's sort of marshy grazing. And in order to build that railway line, they had to do a large quantity of drainage. This left what becomes New Shildon's ace, a really nice flat plateau, which you will see they will make great use of. And then the first buildings are pretty well just about here and here in the new Shildon. So this first edition map shows brilliantly how the railway is what makes New Shildon get plonked where it does. It's because it's where all the lines converge. You've got what is the original sort of line coming in here. You've got what was then the first line going northwards this way. You've got the Surtees Railway branch going here. Oh, look, to a colliery, what a surprise. And you've got the Haggerleases branch that gets added off in this direction once you've gone past the Brusselton Incline. And of course, this is all about the mines. North of Old Shildon, up here, you've got the Adelaide colliery, which was really significant. And obviously more mines closer to Bishop as well. You've got Shildon Lodge, which is operational quite early again, being connected straight into the main Shildon area. And all the mines of West Auckland and Whitton Park are coming down this way. Obviously, we're not hauling all of this by steam. There are the two inclines in play, and then very quickly one of them taken out with the tunnel added in the 1830s and 40s to make a better route up into Bishop. But whichever way you cut it, all of that coal traffic is coming in on a wagon and it's getting deposited in Shildon. So all the, in New Shildon, obviously. So this is where the area which becomes the big marshalling yard, where all of those wagons are brought down, redistributed, and then formed up into their trains to be chugged onwards, increasingly by steam, of course, either to Stockton, to the river ports there, or, of course, down to the company's brand spanking new port at Middlesbrough. And although coal transport is only one thing that the S&DR is interested in, it is, of course, a really key, lucrative and highly successful one. The earliest buildings in New Shildon housed the workmen and the engineers who constructed the line. Early inhabitants include Timothy Hackworth, who of course joined the S&DR in 1825 on the nose as engineer and locomotive attendant. He was running what was the company's own workshop for building locomotives here at what becomes very quickly known as Shildon Works. No, New Shildon for this, always Shildon Works. A few years later, as a completely separate endeavour, he set up his own engineering works at Soho here. And that these two great workshops, one on either end of this new increasing settlement, provide very constant employment for the village. Some of the earliest houses that we have surviving are associated with Hackworth. And here is his house and the cottages, the single-storey ones off the side. Interestingly, when we investigated these, we were quite surprised to find that although the house is relatively conventional, the cottages, you can see you've got two front doors these days, nicely restored back again. But this is such a wide, flattish roof pitch that we wondered what on earth was going on here. We realised they're back-to-backs. They're back-to-back bungalows, effectively. So there's actually a little group of 4 of them next to the Soho House, where Hackworth and his family lived. It's built in the classic sandstone for the area. All of New Shildon's new buildings are in this sort of material and probably quarried very locally. Their quarry is at Thickley, just down the road. And I just wanted to show that what I skipped over was the slide of the magnificent array of sidings which used to exist on that plateau to the east of New Shildon. This is where locomotion now stands. But you can see what an enormous spread of land that took. And you can see just how flat the plateau is as well. The settlement soon grew out of its sort of twin poles of Shildon Works on this side and Soho around the junction here. This is a really fantastic map, which I know railway-focused people get very excited about. So do buildings people, because although it doesn't show the full street plan, it shows you the street plan as it relates to the line. So you can see that you've got a terrace of houses split by a little street here, which is the start of Station Street running along the north side of the main line. You can see the start of blocks of housing here. This is Adelaide Street here, Chapel Street here. You can see a tiny bit of building south of the line, but much less actually. And what we know is that New Shildon gradually starts moving from this key bit here, which is the crossing, the level crossing at the Mason's Arms, the pub that was right on the corner here, now sadly totally closed. And the space between the two works gradually fills up. So here you can see beautifully how the railway works at Shildon is actually expanding to the north side of the line. There's the Sebastopol roundhouse, which was part of the sort of engine stabling. You can see that here is the Mason's Arms crossing. There's the Adelaide Street, and there is Chapel Street that we've just seen on the previous map. Here is Station Street, and that is the end of the last of the grey blocks that was shown in 1839. You can see it's starting to grow up towards the mill. This is Mill Street, unsurprisingly. But all of this area is not at all filled in by the late 1850s, and in fact won't be for a couple of decades. The sort of early housing going up is this sort of thing. It's probably the sort of thing a lot of us pass almost every day in sort of County Durham, Northumberland, these very basic stone 2 up, 2 down cottages. It's good that the render is starting to flake off on number 2 Mill Street, because you can definitely see that sandstone walling is still there. And I suspect it was built as a pair, these two. These look like quite good coins, good corners of the building here. So I think that's a pair of them. They're pretty well the earliest thing that I think I've actually found still standing in New Shildon. And so, yes, very much changed, but still very much with us. The railway also brought considerable economic opportunities on which various entrepreneurs chose to capitalise. This warehouse was built for the Kilburn ironmongery business of Bishop Auckland, because of presumably this was as close to a good bit of railway that they could get to for easy distribution of their goods. So they might have been making in Auckland, but they actually brought it down here for onward distribution. Very quickly, though, Soho Works took it over, then later the NER, and it is now part of the Locomotion's sort of historic building estate that they look after in New Shildon. As you can see, very close to Soho House and Cottages, which is in the background, and built in exactly the same materials as you would expect. So, as the railway network grew, so did the exploitation of the coal seams very close to New Shildon. And by the middle of the 19th century, a large number of mines were operating very close to both Old Shildon and New Shildon. By the end of the century, census returns show that a similar number of people were working in mining as they were on the railway, which I think I found quite surprising when I started thinking about it, because everybody says that Shildon is all about the railway. But actually, even before a mine gets opened in the middle of Shildon, lots of people are working out in the coal mines. This is my roughed up map with spots for mines and lines for railways. Obviously, not every mine and not every branch here is operating at exactly the same time. This is just to sort of capture just how much had happened in the course of that, well, since 1825 to about 1900. And as you can see, the area is just riddled with that combination of railway and coal. You can also see how the coal mines are just interconnected straight into the SNDR's network by all the many sidings, branch lines, and everything else. So as this is booming, more people want to come and live in Shildon and New Shildon. So the town has to start expanding. By the late 19th century, you can see that we've still got this sort of early triangular areas that we'd already seen by the 1850s. But you can see expansion south of the line a little bit, including Hildyard Terrace down here. And the area between the triangle here and Soho is now filled in. Chapel Street, much more busy. And New Shildon is starting to crawl northwards or northwestwards up Redworth Road, Biley Road here. And also, yes, a little bit coming up here too. Eventually, those are the two arteries by which Shildon's old and new join up. So you can see that most of this development is on the north side of the line. I thought it probably would have all gone southwards at the same time, but it really doesn't. It takes quite a long time for that southern bit to expand. Here's a taste of what those houses look like. Here is the S&DR running here. This is Station Street. So that's the last block of the grey bit on the 1839 map. And this is all built in the 1850s to 70s. So Station Street, Victoria Street, and then Soho Street, with the Wesleyan Methodist Church and manse on the corner, and then their later Sunday school just there as well. It's probably the best surviving group of housing in New Shildon to have survived now. And there's a view of it in its prime with the National School and the Institute built on Station Street. Public buildings in Shildon have had quite a variable fate. Some of them have been lucky and have survived, but an awful lot have gone. The Institute site became a cinema. Well, the Institute building itself became the cinema, but that's now cleared. The school is still there. It's a dance school, but it's so heavily rendered, it's quite hard to realise that it is actually one of the very early Shildon buildings. And this is to show you that coal mining moved right into the heart of New Shildon in 1870 when Shildon Colliery was opened. It absolutely took advantage, as you can see, of the many, many lines that are converging in the town. It in itself brings more employment, it brings more need for housing. And in fact, there's a terrace of houses built overlooking it. They don't actually look onto the main roads at all. It's a little sort of footpath thoroughfare to the front of the houses. These would have looked straight up the colliery. I had wondered where the name Pears Terrace came from, or was it Pears, whichever way. And it turns out that Mr. Pears, George Pears, was the owner of the colliery. So job done on that one. And as New Shildon is prospering, the population increased. By 1851, over 2,500 people are living here. By 1891, the combined Shildons, old and new, have a population of over 7,500 people. Once the colliery arrives, and I'll just show you on here, this is obviously a post-war map and the colliery's already gone, but the colliery is here. There's Pears Terrace just there. So after 1870, this is where the development of the new housing in Shildon goes, south of the colliery and south of the line. Yes, if you're looking up into Shildon proper, there's quite a lot going on added up onto the top end of Biley Road. But Redworth Road is where it all is going on in New Shildon. And again, all converging on that Mason's Arms crossing, which is such a key spot in the town. The houses here are, again, not particularly spectacular, although I think this photograph by one of our colleagues shows it brilliantly. Lots and lots of red brick houses. This set do proclaim their red brick to the front, but most of the houses along here on this side are all fronted in stone. So it's almost like they're keeping their old Shildon vernacular in their building material, but actually they're just a basic brick, red brick structure, as you would expect. As the settlement grows, you need more facilities. And again, this shot shows you how there's a kernel of public buildings. All Saints Church, now redundant here. This was the C of E school here, now a sort of a care complex. And of course, the vicarage on this side, with the burial ground attached. Also, lots of allotments. Shildon has always had tons of allotments, and I suspect there's probably more work to be done on all the allotments of Shildon, in the hope that they don't get grabbed for more housing at some point. And so by this stage, by the sort of interwar period, the two Shildons are enmeshed and are connected again. But although the railway industry continued to boom in Shildon up into the post-war period, with the NER, later LNER, and then British Rail continuing to use Shildon Works for their wagon shops and for servicing and manufacture, it was the coal production that absolutely nosedived. By the 1920s, Shildon was known as an area to be in massive financial deprivation from the closure of the coal mines. Questions were asked in Parliament. Bishops were trying to do stuff to support, a workforce losing their jobs day by day. And so, although nobody could stop the fact that coal was already declining in this area this early, at least there was the alternative provider of employment, which was the railway. So we know that Shildon Colliery itself was shut in 1924. This is the Shildon Colliery site, all of this. As you can see now, it is the double duck industrial estate. with actually a very nice like late 1940s factory building there, which I've always enjoyed. There are some early factory buildings hidden under some of this blue cladding too, but they take a bit of weaseling out. And then, of course, the first sort of post-war housing, which is planned actually just before the war, but isn't actually built until the early 1950s, which is this Ferrens Terrace and Crescent around here. Dalton Crescent, yeah. But by the end of the Second World War, there was practically no coal mining left in the Shildon area. Post-war clearances have not been particularly kind to the town. Those early triangles of building that are so clear on the first edition map have been practically all obliterated. And mostly they're open sites now, or they've been given over to new housing. But of course, we know how they built back then. We know that it was just rows and terraces. And at least we have the map evidence to continue showing us that. And, modern people like modern houses, as we know. So the next big trauma for Shildon comes with the closure of Shildon Works in 1984. That's double duck from another angle. So here's the works. So these magnificent, great brick engineering sheds that are just part of the story of the continual renewal of the buildings on this site. Very few of the really early Shildon Works structures survive at all. In fact, none do. But we have a great body surviving from the sort of 1890-ish onwards rebuilding, of which this long engineering shed is one. But of course, the closure of this for wagon building, again, caused massive trauma for the town and huge, huge job losses. We're in thousands of people here. But the buildings remain and in most cases are in quite full use. Where Shildon always did light engineering, Shildon still does light engineering. It's just happening in smaller companies in a lot of these buildings. The town has also expanded hugely to the east with endless housing estates, as it continues to do, and indeed as all of our settlements are doing more and more. So just to tidy up my end of this talk, today, present-day Shildon, old and new, is very much focused on its railway history and its heritage. Rightly so in many ways. If the SNDR hadn't decided to drain that land, create an excellent area for doing a lot of its workmanship, and realise it was great for building houses on for the people who needed to live there, then yes, there would be no new Shildon. And I think that railway centricity of the place has just been cemented by the presence of locomotion. Locomotion's a brand new building. But I think it's due a wider focus, really. There is more to New Shildon than just the railway, and I think coal is very much part of that. So, Marcus, how about some coal drops?
The coal drops. The company constructed the so-called coal drops at Shildon, seen here in 1925, once they were still in use. These were constructed in late 1846, early 1847, so just over 20 years after the railway came to town. Evidence suggests, though, that they were rebuilt and reconfigured several times during their period of use, some 90 years. So what we see today, or even in this photograph from 1925, may not be their original form. In fact, isn't their original form. But we'll go into that in more detail. Despite the name coal drops, the installation is a device for refueling steam locomotives using gravity to drop the coal into the locomotive tender. not, as is more commonly the case with coal drops, as some of you may be aware. The NER in particular had a particular keenness for coal drops, public-facing coal yards, where wagons came in and dropped their loads into bins for resale to the public, or indeed coal drops. The term is also used for other facilities where the coal is dropped from one wagon into another for transfer purposes. These coal drops were intended to speed up the turnaround time of locomotives returning empty wagons to the Shildon marshalling yard before departing with the next train. And that photograph that Lucy showed you of the marshalling yards gives you an idea of the scale of the coal traffic that passed through Shildon. It was massive. There were trains departing, coal trains departing almost constantly. Our research involved making a detailed, accurate record of the drop's fabric using laser scanning, as you see here on what is my left, I think, as you see it. Yes. That's a laser scanner there, operated by one of my colleagues, and also SFM, structure from motion, which is ortho mosaic of photographs taken by drones to create a 3D wireframe model, which was then rendered using those same photographs that we were taking from the drone, but also from cameras mounted on the laser scanning equipment. So to produce this, this is an accurate 3D model of the coal drops as they survive. This was followed by analysis of the fabric, looking very closely at changes in the stonework, etc., and by documentary and historical research, again, local archives, Head of Steam Museum, where the photograph you saw earlier came from, and down in London at the National Archives. I have to, at this point, just give a call out to some of you may have known, or at least have heard of, the late Andy Guy, a leading figure in industrial archaeology, unfortunately died a few years ago. He'd already done a study of the coal drops for the National Railway Museum, who actually are the owners of this monument now, as part owned through their locomotion outstation. That report is unpublished, but is available in York at the NRM library. And as a non-railway expert, but as my introduction said, I'm a landscape archaeologist who's tasked to look at anything from Neolithic monuments through to industrials. I found his report invaluable. As they survive, the drops consist of an elevated platform or stage. So here, this high-level section, some 6 meters high, approached from the northwest by a ramp. This is actually curving, this ramp. The photograph makes it appear as though this is all in a single plane, single orientation, but the ramp is actually curving. Both ramp and stage are retained by stone arcading, as you can see, composed of 49 narrow blind arch recesses, gradually and progressively increasing in height towards the stage. Some of those recesses are now blocked, as you can also see. At the stage, the rhythm of the arcading is broken at regular intervals by 4 rectangular bays. Now, you may be thinking you can see 6 there, but the image actually repeats. So that's a cutoff line there, repeats there. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 bays, which survive. There were originally more. Photographic evidence from the 1920s and 30s, so only a few years before the drops closed in 1935, shows that the 3 narrower bays were where the fueling mechanisms were located, although the actual timber hoppers and spouts that once stood here, and you can see them, 2 of them here, another one there, have long disappeared. The 4th wider bay, which you can see here in between these 2, contained a timber platform, which may have been intended as a raised surface close to tender height, off which coal could be shoveled if for whatever reason a locomotive couldn't use the refueling gravity-fed spouts. It also acted as a landing stage, allowing access between ground level and the top of the stage, which obviously was essential if a locomotive arrived and the hoppers for the gravity-fed spouts were empty. In 1925, when this photograph was taken, you can see there are also two more of these wider bays with timber platforms at the very end of the coal drops, but these were demolished sometime between 1932 and 35. Presumably, all three of those wider bays served a similar function. Lucy's already shown you some Ordnance Survey maps. Hers were at 10,560 scale. These are the larger Ordnance Survey maps at 2,500 scale, which are useful there for showing you the position, but also the form of the earliest record of the form of the coal drops that we really have surveyed in 1856. This also shows you the position of the coal drops in relation to one of these branch lines that Lucy talked about. This is the Black Boy branch coming down from Black Boy Colliery. And you can see a spur from that line. That's the line there running onto the S&DR main line. But a spur of that branch line feeds the drops. And I don't think it's without significance that the Black Boy Colliery that supplied the coal to feed these drops was owned by Joseph Pease, the S&DR chairman. Obviously, he had a nice little contract. He ran the S&DR, he was the chairman of the board, but he also owned Black Boy Colliery. And so he was using one of his business interests to boost his own profits elsewhere. That may be doing him a disservice. He was a good Quaker. Coal wagons delivered to the top of the ramp discharged their loads through bottom opening doors into the hopper within each bay, where the coal was retained until needed by locomotives passing on the coaling road below, which is here. Given the steep angle of the approach ramp, and if you remember the 3D model I showed you, it was a fairly steep approach. It's about 5 degrees. I worked that out as 1 in 11 in imperial, but you might want to check my maths. I did that a while ago. I'm looking at it thinking I'm not sure I believe that, but it was a steep ramp. Probably too steep for steam locomotives to haul wagons up to the top. And instead, since the Black Boy branch line was also too steep for steam traction, it was operated by steam-powered rope inclines. It may be that wagons were allowed to freewheel down the last bit of the incline and climb the ramp using their own momentum, with someone riding, a wagon rider or banksman riding the wagon and applying the brake at the last minute. There is no evidence to disprove or prove that, I'm afraid, but in the absence of anything, I say locomotives wouldn't have got up the ramp. There's no evidence for use of horses. So that may be that's the most plausible explanation. There's evidence in the ramp, you can see, for several phases of rebuilding and strengthening, including at least one phase of heightening. So there you can see it's about 18 inches worth of heightening there. This may have been carried out in response to a fatal accident at the drops in December 1884 that I'll mention in more detail later. But one of the recommendations may well have been to increase the clearance height between the locomotives and the spout, the coaling spouts. And that may be what we're seeing there, dating from 1884, if we're correct in that assumption. Strengthening work is manifested by the buttressing I've already mentioned, you can see there, which visibly infills alternate arch recesses. And this was needed because at some point, if you go to see the drops now, you'll notice it. the outer face is leaning outwards quite considerably. And so what they seem to have, presumably because the foundations being built on marshy ground, the foundations weren't adequate, and over time the structure started to lean. So the buttressing is there to support, obviously, the staging. And then what they seem to have done, if you can see, the upper 4 courses of stonework is radically different to the earlier stonework. So what they've done, as the structure started to lean, they buttressed the lower half. And because you can see that the join there, the rebuild is actually later, it's actually cutting that raising work there, we begin to get a sequence of alterations that is visible in the masonry. But the only dating evidence we have is circumstantial. We don't actually know the dating of any of those phases for certain. As I've already mentioned, early map evidence also points to the high-level stage initially being much shorter. As you see here in 1857, there's a gap between, I've highlighted, it's hard to make out, but I've highlighted what I think is the extent of the coal drops in red. They end here, way short of Shildon Station. The other thing to notice is the Ordnance Survey actually show the ramp element as by hashering, suggesting it's an earthwork ramp at this stage and not retained by that stone arched facade. But by 1896, when you get the second edition of the 2500 map, you can see the hashering is gone. We've now got a hardline detail, so it's a stone wall retaining the ramp and the stage, and the stage is being lengthened to the east. It ends now very close, cheek by jowl, to Shildon Station. So again, we've got evidence for phasing and changes in the form of the coal drops. However, the principle of using gravity to feed the coal, to deliver the coal to the locomotives was present right from the start, as is demonstrated by references to the drops immediately following construction in the very scant contemporary documentation we do have as hoppers and self-filling spouts. So they're always referred to in using that terminology. So although the precise form may be different, so by the time we have evidence for it in the 1920s, the principle is the same, has always been the same. In the decades immediately after 1825 and the opening of the railway, the sole means of fuelling a locomotive, both on the S&DR and more generally across the UK rail network, seems to have been by teams of men laboriously shoveling coal from line-side bunkers into the engine tender. You've already seen this map. This is Thomas Dixon's map of Shildon in 1839. And as you can see, the drops aren't shown on this. They were to be built here. This is the Black Boy branch line coming down. The drops are here somewhere. But at this stage, 10 years before they exist, we have what appears to be, although it's unnamed, appears to be a bank of bunkers for refueling locomotives. However, our research at the National Archives uncovered a previously unseen letter that suggests in October 1846, the SNDR was reviewing its procedures and had come up with a novel plan. A bit like Baldrick, really, isn't it? It is unclear who exactly came up with the idea. The tone of the letter suggests both men in charge at Shildon Works, the engineer William Bouch and the works manager Oswald Jukes, doubted the need for the drops, but the idea was supported by Joseph Pease, the company manager, perhaps because he owned Black Boy Colliery. Designs subsequently drawn up by John Graham, the traffic superintendent, had been approved by December 1846, and construction must have started very soon after, for the company accounts for 1846 to 47 tell us that the work was complete by the end of that financial year. I don't know how the financial year of the SNDR ran It might have run from September to August because it opened in September. I don't know. I can check that. So construction lasted somewhere perhaps up to 10 months. Unfortunately, those first plans seem not to survive. Certainly, they don't seem to exist at the National Archives. And therefore, detailed evidence for the original form of the hoppers and spouts is lacking, as I've said. Indeed, the only extensive documentary evidence for what the features looked like and how they operated is all the various editions of the Ordnance Survey I've already shown, a single newspaper report of this coroner's inquest in 1884, which I think I've got a slide of. Deceased was standing on the footboard of the engine when his head was coal spout in the engine house, i.e. the cab roof, with the result that the skull of the unfortunate man was severed from his face, his brains being scattered. Right, you get the gist. That doesn't, if you read on, it doesn't really tell you much about the form of the drops, but you get the idea of there being spouts, hoppers and spouts. And at the end of this newspaper report, the coroner's jury recommended that spouts should be altered and made movable. So we've got the Ordnance Survey maps, we have this coroner's inquest, and we've got a few photographs from the 1920s and 30s. And here's two that you haven't seen. There are only three, you've now seen them all. These are in the Head of Steam Museum. So using all these sources in combination with the evidence of the fabric, the phasing in the fabric and position of stone sockets, or sockets in the stonework, I should say, where timber beams were located, we have been able to offer a reconstruction of what these spouts look like. Here's the form of the spout. You can see, well, you may not be able to see it because it's quite dark, but it's largely based on this photograph. The hopper is set back inside the bay. You've got this spout, or chute, perhaps I should say, coming, feeding from it. You've got a trap door. You can just see the top of it there, which would have been operated by this lever, or possibly not by that lever, I don't know. And then you have a movable spout, which could be brought down, as you see here. So there's your trapdoor. Trapdoor's been raised, coal's released from the bunker down the chute. And once this trapdoor arrangement's released, the fireman can release the coal into his tender. So as I've said, what survives of the drops today is not how they were first built. They were demonstrably reconstructed and extended on several occasions, and their operation undoubtedly improved and made safer. But the general principle of how they functioned, utilising gravity to transfer coal directly between wagons and locomotive tenders without the need for manual shovelling, remained constant. In this, it is likely that whoever it was in the SDR who first proposed the idea of the drops in 1846 took inspiration from the coal drops that already existed and had done for a century or more at coastal coal states, where similar contraptions were used to transfer coal arriving by rail into sea-going vessels. Now, coastal coal drops were designed to eliminate both the double handling of coal and to permit gentle transfer to minimise breakage. As you see here, they work by coal wagons with bottom opening doors being positioned above chutes that guided the contents down into the ship's hold, or alternatively, if the wagons had end doors, by lowering them into the hold on platforms and upending them. So imagine almost like a seesaw arrangement with a coal wagon on it, up and over the side of the ship, down into the hold, and then the whole platform tips and coal will come out through an end door, if that's the sort of wagon in use. I know this illustration, as you see there, is from 1912, so almost 100 years after the ships were constructed. So you might think it's a bit of an anachronism to be showing you something that's so obviously so much later than the idea that I'm talking about. But it's afraid it's the only one or the best one that I could find from a quick online search. But I don't think the basic idea changed between 1846 when the Shildon coal drops were first thought about and built, and 1935 when they closed. This idea of taking an existing technology and putting it to novel use to refuel railway locomotives seems to have been an SDR first. And I'm sure Les will disagree with me there, but we'll wait and see. Both nationally and given the UK's primacy in the development of railways, perhaps even globally. However, it was not one apparently adopted by the SNDR's competitors. For example, in 1851, so only 4 years after the drops at Shildon are constructed, the London and North Western Railways engineer, John Ramsbottom, came up with this alternative, some might say Heath Robinson design, for a canted rotating carousel of buckets. So what you have here are two adjacent sidings. The locomotive with its tender is here, parallel siding with coal wagons, and then you have a cokeman shoveling out coal manually into buckets, which are then rotated on this canted carousel up and over the side of the engine tender and in. Allegedly, if the buckets were pre-filled beforehand, it only took about 2 minutes to deliver some 2,100 weight of coal. I think I got that right. 2,100 weight, no, it may not be that much, but 200 weights. I suggest the failure to adopt the SNDR's idea using gravity feed, the failure for that idea to be more widely copied, is likely for 2 reasons. Firstly, because other early railway companies were forced to use coke in their locomotives because of clauses in their Enabling Act that required the engines to consume their own smoke. The SNDR didn't have that clause in its Enabling Act because it was the first public railway to use steam locomotives. Yes, you have to be very careful with railway first because there's always, you have to qualify it every time you say it because it's an incremental process through time. And coke is more friable, it's more breakable than coal, therefore it has to be handled more gently. So the idea of dropping it from height, even using a chute, might not be tenable to other railway companies. I don't know. I say I'm not a railway expert. That's one possibility. But then after 1860, I think it is, the firebox design improves in locomotives, and most locomotives after that date, through the second half of the 19th century, are able to burn coal rather than coke. The 19th century railway ran on coal, not coke by and large. So that inhibition to its wider adoption of the idea of the coal drops might have been overcome sometime after 1860 anyway. But by then, obviously, many other railway companies have built their own facilities and they may not be willing to reinvest. More crucially than that, however, was the design of a coaling stage that we see at Shildon was conditional on the design of wagons that fed it. Wagons at this time came in a multiplicity of forms with doors in different positions, bottom opening, side opening, end opening. So if you're going to have a design like Shildon coal drops, you need always to ensure that the coal is being brought in bottom opening wagons. Bottom opening wagons are common across the northeast of England and will continue to be so. But in other parts of the country, they had a tradition for side opening wagons and wagons with end doors. So that may have been another inhibiting factor. So other designs still using gravity. I mean, here on the left, you see an elevated stage with wagons parked at the top, but it's manual handling. You've got those wagons have side opening doors. Cokemen have to shovel out the coal into these two-wheeled barrows with a very distinctive curved spoke arrangement, and then run that out over these platforms that were lowered down and tipped into the engine tender. Other arrangements, if you didn't have an elevated stage, you use cranes, but again, the tubs that the cranes lifted up and over into the engine tender were normally filled by hand, had to be filled by hand. So it was a time-consuming and laborious business. The only other example of a cola of the type that we see at Shildon, coal drops, that we've been able to find is this one at the Philadelphia, on the Philadelphia Railway, the Lambton Railway. They had opened an engine running shed in 1917, and these photographs show the coaling stage that was built at that time. So an elevated stage, you can see here, because they're more open, you can see the bunker beneath the stage, and then you might just be able to make out there are chutes, if you like, that in this case, they hinge up out of the way and are only lowered when needed. I better get a move on. Sorry about this. As it was not until 1910 that the principle of gravity refueling was adopted widely across the UK rail network. And this is when the first rotary tippler was constructed at Crewe. This isn't Crewe, but this is Darlington Bank Top, very similar. And the principle here was that the entire railway wagon was lifted, raised and tipped into those bunkers. There was two variations. One took the whole wagon, lifted it and tipped it. Others, the wagons emptied into a bunker beneath the track, and then the coal was raised to the overhead bunker by a conveyor. But it's only after 1910 that that principle of gravity feed really becomes widespread on the UK rail network. So the Shildon drops, to conclude, already a listed structure prior to our HAS, having been first designated in 1986, but only at grade 2, so the lowest level of protection, heritage protection. They then lay derelict, as you see here, having not been used since 1935. And you can see something of the state that they had deteriorated into. When British Rail closed the Stockton works, the whole estate was acquired by Sedgefield District Council, later Durham County Council, and has since been sympathetically restored in order to be made structurally safe and form part of the visitor experience now at Locomotion. Historic England's research reported here justifies our decision, I think, to upgrade their listing to grade 2 star. So we now consider them within the top 8% of listed buildings in this country. What at first sight seemed a very unassuming monument type, it's been shown to be a major experiment in the way steam locomotives were refueled on Britain's early railways. It was, in all probability, an S&DR first, but ultimately it also seems to have been an evolutionary dead end for the reasons I've discussed. And finally, if you want to find out any more about what either Lucy or I have talked about tonight, these are our research reports, which are available online on the Historic England website. Just go to our website, type in research reports, and you'll find a research report database. And you can type in Shildon and you'll get these and other options. And again, if you go to our website, back 2 months ago to coincide with the 200th anniversary of the opening of the S&DR, we published, dedicated our research magazine to Railway 200, and that includes articles by Lucy and myself on what we talked about tonight, but also a number of other articles on other S&DR and early railway subjects that Historic England has researched over the last 10 years or so. Thank you very much.